Welcome to Don't Retire, Graduate, the podcast that asks you what you want to be when you grow up so you can graduate into retirement with purpose and passion. I'm your host and valedictorian, Eric Brotman, and I am excited to share with you that our audience is now over 100,000 downloads and growing rapidly, and I can't thank you enough for making Don't Retire, Graduate a part of your personal financial journey. Our guest today is John Crane. John's an author, a financial advisor, and a retirement income planner who spent more than a decade providing personalized financial guidance to business professionals, corporate executives, and medical specialists. He's a member of the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors and the $1 Million Roundtable. A lifelong learner himself, John shares his expertise with students at hospitals and high schools throughout the Washington, D.C. area. His new book is called The One Number Budget, in which he reveals a simple approach to budgeting that will forever impact how you look at retirement and your financial goals. He describes the current state of financial services, discusses the psychological aspect of spending, and explains why and how one number is all you need to help ensure that you're meeting your goals. John, welcome to Don't Retire, Graduate.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to find out what my number is. I don't know if we're going to do that on air or not. I don't know how comfortable I am sharing all of my financial details. But, on this show for the last 5 years, we've been calling a budget that we just call that the B word. And the show is clean. So the only B word we use is budget. And I, for one, despise the art of budgeting and the idea of budgeting. It's fine for companies, but I hate it for personal use. And yet you've managed to make this uniquely easy and different. And I definitely want to dive into that. But first, I'd like to know a little bit more about you, how you got into the financial advisory business, and then what possessed you, like the rest of us, to write a book.
So I got into the financial services business as a second career. Right out of college, of course, as any young man, you want to be a lot like your dad. So my dad was a 35-year veteran in the IBM Corporation. So as soon as I got out of college, I joined another Fortune 500 company called Sprint, and started in the telecommunications industry and worked my way up the corporate ladder, chasing paychecks and promotions. And by the time I was 29 years old, I had my master's in business administration. I was married. I owned a house. I was a senior national account manager assigned to Sprint's largest account. And everybody around me was just like, wow, you're really doing great. And, you've got it made. And I just didn't want to do that. Sprint was a great company. They treated me really well, but I just couldn't see myself spending, another 30 years doing that. So I took about 2 years while in that job researching different careers. And a part of my process was once I found a career that I thought might be a good fit, I would meet with people that knew me well, and I would say, hey, could you see me doing this? And when I got to financial advisor, I started hearing, not only could I see you doing it, but if you choose to do that, call me. I want you to be my guy. And that's when I knew that I'd figured it out. And so in 2002, I pivoted and joined the firm that I'm with, Financial Growth Partners, affiliated with Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, and Crane Financial is a partner of that. And it's been almost 21 years now.
Good for you. Actually, I've got you by a little bit. I started at this 29 years ago, which is hard to believe. But something about our business does attract, it attracts a certain kind of person. It attracts people who not only are savvy in terms of financials and numbers and all of that, but more importantly, people who really understand people and are empathetic and can listen and learn and really want to help people. I mean, we really, despite all of what Hollywood has done to demonize the financial professional, most of the financial professionals I know are actually really trying to make a difference in people's lives. So let's talk about the book. I have it. I've read it. I'm going to dissect it and play with it a little bit today. And I've got some talking points that I wanted to throw out at you. But first, why a book and why budgeting?
Budgeting is something that all my clients don't really like to talk about. When I first got into the industry, I created a spreadsheet to drive the budgeting conversation. And on one side, I had all of your fixed expenses, and on the other side, I had all variable expenses. There were about 30 to 40 categories. Then up at the top, I had a simple income calculation, backing out retirement contributions, and a simple tax calculation. And in this very center of this spreadsheet, I had basically backed into what I estimated their monthly surplus was based on the information they provided. And sadly, like, it took me about 15 years to realize that clients really hated that spreadsheet. And they
Okay.
hated it for a number of reasons. One is it's time intensive. Nobody really wants to go through their stuff. But it also, it's the nature of the budgeting conversation with anybody, whether it's a financial advisor or a spouse or anybody. There's always kind of a worry that you're going to be judged, and we see a lot of that with the talking heads on TV and radio. They start diving into a caller's budget, and then you start hearing, well, oh my gosh, how did you not know that you couldn't afford that car? Like, the budget shaming, you can tell, like, I really have a problem with it because it's just not helpful. So I wanted to create a tool that people would find helpful and would get results. One of my drivers is, and you likely know this too, is the demographic of 55 to 64 in America. Their median net worth is about $215,000, and some of that's home equity. So you can't spend all of that 215. And to me, I think traditional budgeting bears some of the responsibility for that result. And part of me writing the book was I want to try and put a dent in that problem. I want to show people a different way, a way that simplifies the budgeting process. It takes a lifetime approach to budgeting and helps people get results. And about 3-4 years ago, I was talking with a colleague, and he just walked me through a whiteboard conversation, which is basically the similar math problem to what's the book's about, on a whiteboard, and guides the client through that discussion. And I was like, I think I could adopt that. And then after watching Moneyball, the movie, for, I don't know, the 18th time, there's a scene in the movie where the smart guy in the film says to Billy Beane, the general manager of the Oakland A's, it's all about getting things down to one number. And I was like, I wonder if I could get budgeting down to one number. So if I knew what that one number was, if I'm a client and I knew what that one number was, like how much I could spend every month, as long as I keep my spending below that number, then I'm okay. And that's where the concept was born.
Okay. And I'm fascinated by how people have adopted this. I'm sure the fact that you've not only created a book, but that you're working clients through this exercise, I'm sure it's been well received, and I'm sure you're feeling more rewarded by it, as opposed to putting people through a budgeting process that's a little bit like a root canal. You talk in the book about your number, and historically, advertising. Lots of different companies have said, do you know your number? What's your number? And the number is always, how much money do you need to be financially independent? The number winds up having lots of commas, and it's a huge, daunting number. And it scares the heck out of people, especially young people, because it relies on inflation assumptions. And so you tell somebody 29 or 39 years old that you're going to need X millions of dollars to live the way you live today, and it almost feels insurmountable. So when we think about your number, lots of us have been trained or conditioned to think about that huge, unwieldy number that we need to get to. Like, if you only had X million dollars, you could be fine. So you're talking about a totally different number. How do you do it? Let's walk through the exercise for all of us, including myself.
Sure. So just for folks listening, if they want to kind of look at the spreadsheet and follow along, if you go to the book website, onenumberbudget.com/worksheet, you can get a copy of it and look at it. So the way that the calculation is done, it's pretty simple. There's only really 8 or 9 boxes that you really need to be concerned with. And up at the top, we start with gross household income. And once we have that gross household income entered, the very first thing I'm telling clients to do, and this is if I'm meeting them for the very first time, is I'm backing out 20% for wealth building, and I write specifically for retirement.
Okay.
And then once I back out the retirement 20%, then I put an estimate in for a blended tax rate between federal, state, and local, because as you know, the IRS is going to take it anyway. And then we get down
Indeed.
to the calculation there reveals what's available for lifestyle expense. And that's an annual number. I divide that by 12 to get it to a monthly number. And then to further simplify, I back out the client's two largest monthly expenses, which usually are housing or childcare, housing or student loan, something like that. And once I back out those two monthly expenses down at the bottom, then I get to my one number. And when I'm
Okay.
walking a client through for the very first time, I'll get down to that one number and I'll say, can you get through 4 weeks on discretionary expenses? Can you get through 4 weeks on this dollar amount? And I'll wait for an answer. And if they say yes, then I'll point back to the 20% savings number and say, okay, well, if you can get through 4 weeks on this number, then that means this 20% savings rate is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll go through a little crib sheet exercise of, well, let's see what you're saving right now. Most people that I get introduced to are usually saving somewhere between 8 and 12%, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
They're maxing
Mm-hmm.
out their 401k plans. They're saving a little bit in an investment account, but right around 10 to 12%. And that gives me the baseline to then have that conversation. Now, you had referenced earlier, we were talking about the traditional budgeting method. When I'd reveal the estimated monthly surplus to my clients, let's say it's $3,000 a month. And I would suggest, okay, well, out of that $3,000 a month, we need to increase your savings rate. So why don't we shift $1,500, just half of it, over into long-term wealth building? And it's usually at that moment the client starts to sing. And I'm sure you've heard your clients sing too. They go, well, I don't know. Let's do 300. And it was always met with some level of scarcity, that they were afraid to commit any of that money to long-term wealth building. The reason I share that is when I do it this way with the one number budget and clients see that they're saving 12, they see that it's potentially possible that they could be saving 20%. Now it's like competition kicks in and they're like, oh yeah, we can move it up to, yeah, we can get to 20, no problem. Yeah, let's figure this out. And sometimes, I have to kind of talk them down a little bit because, if you make a $2,000 shift in your cash flow in 1 month, like you're going to notice.
Yeah, no question about that. So essentially what you've done is reframed the conversation around calculating a savings or investment rate that's healthy, and you use 20%, and that's sort of a rule of thumb, I presume. I presume you also then do some kind of calculation that says, hey, you're already 46 years old, so 20% won't cut it. You need to be at 23 or 28 or whatever it is. Or you're young enough that you can get away with 15% if you also take advantage of these other options. But I love that there's a barometer. We've historically used 15% as a barometer and said, if
Right.
you're saving 15% for long term, forget things like education savings and things you're going to spend, but for the long term, if you're saving 15% and you have no adverse debt, then you already have the foundation to create wealth. I mean, that really,
Right.
ultimately, that's partly what this is about. And I love the idea that this is a simple monthly budget exercise. Now, how do you handle folks who maybe do this but either don't maintain the right emergency fund or the right risk management or insurance tools or other things that might be icebergs in that journey for them? How do you put that into this equation and make sure that they also have a protection component to their planning?
One of the things that I always felt was really missing from traditional planning is that it's a snapshot in time. And it kind of drives the behavior of, as long as I have more money than month, then I'm okay. It's really only focused on a 30-day cycle. And when I was going through the process of writing the book, I wanted to include that lifetime perspective, and I highlighted a 90-year hypothetical lifetime. So 90-year hypothetical lifetime, and broke it into thirds: the first 30, the middle 30, and the final 30. So the first 30, your parents basically pay for that one. So I don't really spend a lot of time talking about that. The middle 30, that's really the engine. That's where you're in your prime earning years and you're making money, and that's when you need to be putting money away. And then the final 30 is when you're retired. So what became really clear to me as I was working on that piece of the book was you basically have 60 years of living that gets funded out of 30 years of earning. And
Okay.
that's tremendous pressure on those 30 years because in addition to needing to save for retirement and live for today, you also have, kids soccer camp and, you want to take your family on vacation and you need cars and there's just all this stuff. There's lots of pressure on those 30 years. So if I'm challenged with leading somebody to save the right amount and to protect their income, because if you had a disability early in your career, I mean that's going to wipe you out. Or if you passed away, I mean the only person that's really making money after they died is Michael Jackson. It's like you're not. No
But he
disrespect to
can't
Michael
spend it.
Jackson.
No, he
Yeah,
can't spend it though. But no.
So protecting the money you're going to make during those 30 years is hugely important to those that either, if you're disabled, that'll be taking care of you, or if you're gone, the people that are left behind.
You in the book go into some depth on human life value, which I think is a concept that it's unique, I think, to the Huebner school of life insurance planning. That's sort of where that idea came from, the idea that your human life value changes as you get older because it's almost like having potential energy versus kinetic energy in physics, where you begin with this earning potential that you have. As a 25-year-old, you have 30 or 40 or plus years of earning potential that calculates into your human life value. And then when you're 70, your human life value is much more closely aligned with your actual physical value because you don't have all that necessarily that earning capacity, Michael Jackson notwithstanding. How did you decide to incorporate human life value into the conversation on the budgeting side? Because I like the way you shared that, and I was hoping you'd share it with our audience.
Yeah, reason I tie human life value is so important in explaining the protection elements for lawsuit protection, disability, and life insurance. And human life value, for those listening, it's basically the amount of money, the lump sum that would be needed in order to recreate your income stream, backing out inflation and taxes. The reason I included it in the budgeting exercise is, one, I want people to know about the human life value concept for their protection design. The second reason, and more relevant to the budgeting exercise, I wanted human life value in there so that they had some gauge as to what's possible. I'd have clients sometimes, they'll come to meet with me for the very first time. They have a household income of $150,000 and they tell me they want to have $20 million by the time they're 45. And that's a pretty big distance to travel between that income and that dollar amount. So I wanted to include human life value so they can kind of get a gauge. Like, okay, well, if I make $150,000 a year and I use a 20 times multiple or even a 30 times multiple, I'm looking at about $4 million. Okay, so that's kind of, to reference back to what you were talking about with the one number commercials from years ago. I wanted to give them something that was kind of like based in economics.
One of the things you talk about in the book that I really liked, you talked about the things to beware, and there's nothing quite like the idea of losing or missing out or FOMO or sort of having people hate to lose money much more than they love to make money. So you get into some of the behavioral finance concepts, the psychological torture that people go through and the timing torture and some of that. But one thing you relate to is a financial vampire. And, I love that idea because you're just thinking about the image of something literally being sort of sucked dry. That's a very powerful image. How did you come up with the financial vampire concept, and how does that apply to this exercise?
Well, think about it. I mean, everybody's trying to get your money. Everybody's trying to get your money. And Madison Avenue is really talented at making you want stuff or believe that you need stuff. The store that really I find amazing is Target. and they're the absolute experts at this. And I think I talk about it in the book, the mini deep fryer. It's usually on an aisle cap. It's $19.95, and each time I go to Target, I walk through the aisles and I'll find somebody that has that in their cart. And no one will ever convince me that when they woke up that morning that they're like, okay, I'm going to go and I got to cut the grass. I got to go to Target and buy the mini deep fryer. Like, nobody plans on buying that. And the French fries on the cover look delicious, but you after using it once, and then you got to clean the thing, and it ends up in the next yard sale. So the other one at Target, which I like to make fun of, is like the Karate Kid, like the Karate Kid movie series. I'm a child of the '80s. It's like you see that and you're like, oh my God, I got to get that. That'd be so much fun to watch tonight. Like, they're just Target's just so great at the impulse purchase. And then the other one that I talk about in the book also is like buying a car. I mean, everybody likes a new car, and the way that one typically works is, buying a new car. It's always on the monthly financing that they're able to make the car seem like not that big of a deal, the car purchase. So if you have a monthly payment of, say, $450, and the new car is going to be a monthly payment of $600, well, then it's not costing you $600. It's really only costing you an extra $150, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the rationalization that goes through the mind, and like, someone really smart came up with that, and that's why they have that discussion with you. So
Yeah.
being aware of your financial vampires is hugely important to keep yourself on track.
So the financial vampire concept is this idea that everyone's sort of out to get you. And we're barraged with advertising of things we need and keeping up with the Joneses. And by the way, social media did not help us in that regard. In fact, if
No.
anything, it made it
Yeah,
worse,
no.
because everyone's life is perfect on social media. And wow, look at their house, their shrubs, their driveway, their vacations. And man, why aren't we doing all of those things simultaneously? But you also
Right.
talk about something that I think is really powerful that I think might get missed. And that's about spending for love. Now,
Yeah.
historically, I've used the airplane safety lecture with folks,
Yeah.
which is when you're flying commercial, it says in the event of loss of cabin pressure, mask will drop down. Please secure your own mask before securing the mask of others, your kids, and so forth. And as a father of a teenager, if I were in that situation, my immediate instinct would be to save my daughter. That's just
Right.
a human parental instinct. However, in theory and probably in practice, if I try to do that and I pass out, I'm of no help to her at all.
Right.
Well, financially, that's akin to making sure that your kids have undergrad and grad school carte blanche, and then you have to decide which one you're going to live with, because now you no longer have your own wherewithal. So spending for love can be education, it can be other things. How do you describe that? And how do you warn people who, of course, are trying to be benevolent but can be hurting themselves?
Sure. The college discussion is always a challenge. Because we want the best for our kids. I have a daughter also. She'll be going off to school in the fall. And the way that I approach it is I try to approach it as early as possible and lay the groundwork with the parents, because the thing that I want to help them avoid is, if they don't have the money discussion about college early enough, their kids get to be 14, 15, 16, and then the college salespeople are in the school, and their friends are getting enamored with different schools. And once your child locks onto an expensive school and they come to you and they're like, yeah, I got in, I applied, I got in, now you're on your heels. And the only thing that you can say is either, no, we really don't have the money for that, or which the statement that I really don't like to hear as the advisor is, well, it'll be okay, we'll just figure it out. And if the client doesn't have a funded retirement, like, there's nothing really to figure out. Like, and the path that I'll walk folks down is, I'll just say, look, I'm the financial advisor, so I'll say the ugly thing that no one wants to say, which is, your children don't need to go to college. We want them to go to college, but they don't need to. You, on the other hand, you have to retire. It's going to happen. At some day in the future, you will receive your last paycheck. And when you do, there will not be another one. And if you're not financially self-sufficient, then where are you going to be living? Or who will you be living with? And they usually figure it out pretty quick. And then once we have that discussion, I'll say, okay, well, from my view and view as a financial advisor, one of the greatest gifts that we can give our children is to be financially independent in retirement and to not end up as a line item on their budget.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes when, money's tight, it's a difficult conversation. And, it's just, it is what it is. I've had some success stories along the way and helped some families along those lines, but it is a tough conversation.
Well, and it's a two-way street too, because all of us, I don't know if your parents are living, but as my parents are in their 80s or approaching there, you start to worry about whether you're going to wind up writing checks for your daughter and your parents simultaneously while trying to handle your own stuff. And this sandwich generation piece requires an unbelievable abundance. And I told each of my parents a couple of things, and you can tell me whether this was good advice or not, and you can beat on me if you want to. But the first thing I said is, you don't ever have to leave me a nickel, but please manage to pay your own bills. Don't have me paying your bills. That would be difficult. You don't have to leave me anything, but please take care of yourselves. And the other was, please have long-term care insurance, because if you don't buy long-term care insurance, I'm buying it for you, and I'm bringing it up every Thanksgiving. So that was the way the conversation went. You will have long-term care insurance, whether I pay for it or you do. And that's the end of the discussion, because that's something that sinks ships multi-generationally. If somebody gets sick, particularly cognitive impairment, and they haven't covered that base in some way, then we're stuck in a position where we either have to decide that, yes, it's okay for mom to be in a Medicaid facility where we wouldn't necessarily want to choose any of our loved ones to spend time, or we have to subtract from our own retirement or our own children's opportunities to take care of those things. Did I give good advice? Was this helpful, or am I just a terrible curmudgeon of a son?
No, it goes back to what I said before. That middle 30 has tremendous pressure on it, and if you're adding other people's cash flows to your cash flow, and I mean when I say adding cash flows, I'm saying negative cash flows to your monthly budget, it just makes it that much harder for you to be financially independent too. And it's not just you talked about parents, but it's also adult children. If you're subsidizing adult children, same thing. So it behooves you to have those conversations as early as possible.
So I saw somewhere a statistic, and I'm not going to quote it because I'm not 100% sure where I saw it, but something like 70 or 75% of adult people are paying something for their children in their 20s. They're beyond college, but they're grown kids, 20s plus. That's alarming. Is life really that expensive that you can't launch, or are these kids trying to live on the lifestyles that their parents' 30 years of work created rather than the ones that they're just getting started with?
Yeah, I can't speak to that statistic, but I have, when working with young people, sometimes, had to gently point out that, your dad and your mom, they drive BMWs because they worked for 30, 35 years and they're now they have a career, like they're an attorney or they're a physician, and they make a lot of money, and you make $50,000 a year. So driving a BMW doesn't really make sense for you. And it's usually not a long, involved discussion, but it makes sense though, because they're in that fishbowl of, my parents, they went out to get a car and that's the car they drive. So that's probably what I should do too. Makes total sense. But sometimes, I have to share with them, like, that's not you yet. It will be you, but it's not you yet.
Well, it could be. And if you could be anyway. Yeah.
And if you try to live that lifestyle too early, then it's going to really impede you from being able to have some things later on. So anyway, but yeah, that's I've seen that problem.
So folks go through this process, and you have some worksheets and some other things, and they go through the budget process, and they're saving their 20%, and they're avoiding adverse debt, and they're doing all the things they need to do. And now they're getting to that third, whether it's 60 or 65 or 74, whatever it is, they're getting to that next phase of life where instead of accumulating wealth, which I think all of us sort of intrinsically know how to do. You know how to add to something every month and watch the mountain chart, and we've all been trained to do it over our whole adult lives. But then you have
Right.
to figure out, how do you use it? How do taxes play a role? How do you use it? How do you create income for yourself? How do you make sure that you run out of oxygen before you run out of money? Like all those kinds of things. How do you guide people, or how do you suggest that people frame what the financial purpose of retirement is, or what that process is going to look like? And then my follow-up question, and I know I'm never supposed to ask two at once, but I'm going to, and that is, how do you handle the non-financial aspects of retirement with these folks, of trying to figure out what they're going to do with what could be a third of their lives and a half of their adult lives?
Right. The first question, over the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, I have started the retirement income planning discussion with folks in their mid 40s.
Okay.
Using the tools on the financial planning software that I use, I'll start
Mm-hmm.
showing them, based upon what we've got right now, this is what your retirement income is going to look like, give or take. And
Mm-hmm.
that helps the client in multiple ways. One is it kind of gives them a sense as to where they're at. And then two, if they're not really on pace, then it's a motivation to save more. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and the savings rate is actually holding two important roles. One, the obvious one, which is it's helping you accumulate money. But the second role that it plays is it creates a hole in your cash flow. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're saving 20% or 30% as you're getting closer to retirement, then that's 20 to 30%. You're not going to be saving for retirement in retirement. So you're
Right.
artificially keeping your standard of living lower than it could be. So you have less that you have to replace in retirement. So that's how I do that. As it relates to the non-emotional stuff, like what are they going to do when they ultimately retire? I'm in the
Yeah.
strategic coach program with Dan Sullivan, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the greatest conversations he ever taught me was this conversation called the DOS conversation, where if looking out 5 years, going back to today, what would have to happen for me to feel happy with my progress, both personally and professionally. And I have that conversation about on a rolling 5-year basis with all of my clients during reviews, and it helps them think through that, or forces them to think through that. And that's been enormously helpful.
I have long believed that retirement in the traditional sense is dreadful for you and no one should do it. And people look at me
Well, you
funny
know what
when I
Dan
say
Sullivan
that.
says?
Tell
Do
me.
you know what Dan Sullivan says? Yeah,
I
this is
don't. I
great.
don't.
He
I know
goes,
who he is, but I don't know what he says.
Dan Sullivan says is nobody should retire. Everybody that has retired has died.
Well, true, fair. Bobby Bowden, the coach from Florida State, used to say that I don't want to retire because then I only have one milestone left and I'm not ready for that one.
Yeah.
So similar idea. I think that retirement, if it involves daytime TV and golf, will get very boring very fast, despite how much you love
Yeah.
golf or daytime TV. And so I really do think we have to coach people through a process and ask them the question that I'm going to ask you now, because I would love to know what you want to be when you grow up.
Sure. Well, the default answer, which would probably be disappointing, is this is my second career, so I've kind of been through a similar process already. I
Mm-hmm.
really do enjoy what I do, but there will come a day where I will retire from this. So the leading candidate right now, if I had to give you an answer, is I would love to be on a lake somewhere and to be the guy doing fishing charters for like striped bass on
Nice.
lakes. I would really like to do
Nice.
that.
Okay. And where's the lake?
In Virginia, we've got two. There's one, Smith
Okay.
Mountain Lake, down south of Lynchburg, and then Lake
Okay.
Anna, which is just west of Fredericksburg.
All right. So John Crane Bass Fishing Charter is born. That's what's coming, or maybe?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean, I would love to do that, and it's also the kind of
Okay.
thing where I can kind of decide when and how often I'm going to go out, and I can
I
make
love
my
that.
own schedule. So.
Love it. All right. Well, I'm going to ask you for an extra credit assignment. And I know there's a ton of homework in your book, and we're definitely going to let you share with folks how to get in touch with you and how to get your book. So, but first, an extra credit assignment. What can folks walk away with and do today, potentially, as a result of spending half hour with us?
Sure. Go to the book website, onenumberbudget.com, and download the introduction and first chapter. The first chapter of the book, it starts off with a poem. And I feel that I'm not going to ruin the poem, but just the poem I feel is insightful. I'm trying to change the paradigm and how people think about their lives in retirement. And I would really encourage people to start there. And that's something you can download and have in less than 5 minutes. And then
love it.
also
and you wrote this
downloading
poem.
the worksheets.
You wrote this poem.
I did.
You wrote this poem, correct? Yeah. Okay. All right. No, that's good.
Yeah.
It's one thing to quote someone else. It's another thing to put yourself out there and actually start with a poem. So I applaud you for that. Where can folks get it? You had mentioned the book and the first chapter. Where else can folks find out more about you?
Website for my business is cranefinancial.com, and I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there as well.
This has been fun. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your book, your humor, and your time with us. I really thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. And thanks for being here.
Oh, you're very welcome. I enjoyed it too.
For all of you, thank you for watching and listening today. We'd love to hear from you. So please send us a message or leave comments at don'tretiregraduate.com or on social media. If you enjoy our show, don't keep it a secret. Share it with your friends and family so they can join you on your path to financial freedom. And please leave us ratings and reviews on your favorite podcast platforms. Those are priceless to us. We'll be back next week with another installment of Office Hours, and in 2 weeks with another engaging guest. For now, this is your host, Eric Brotman, reminding you, don't retire, graduate.
Securities offered through Kestra Investment Services, LLC, Kestra IS, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Kestra Advisory Services, LLC, Kestra AS, an affiliate of Kestra IS. Kestra IS or Kestra AS are not affiliated with Brotman Financial or any other entity discussed.
This podcast is intended for general public use. By providing this content, Park Avenue Securities, LLC, and your financial representative are not undertaking to provide investment advice or make a recommendation for a specific individual or situation or to otherwise act in a fiduciary capacity. Don't Retire, Graduate podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Crane Financial, and its opinions are stated or are their own. John W. Crane, Registered Representative and Financial Advisor, Park Avenue Securities, LLC, Pass, Office Jurisdiction 11350, McCormick Road, Executive Plaza 3, Suite 202, Hunt Valley, Maryland, 21031. Telephone 667-318-0801. Securities products and advisory services offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA SIPC. Financial representative, Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Crane Financial LLC is not an affiliate or subsidiary of Park Avenue Securities or Guardian. California Insurance License Number 0G as in George 79065. Compliance Number 2023-155804. Expiration June 2024.